Hello, welcome to Shad Life. Today I'm going to do the fork adjustments on my new Esker Japhy here. I did all these other adjustments to get the bike ready for spring, but I still need to set up the fork to my liking. So that's what I plan to show you today. This is the MRP Raven fork, so these adjustments are specific to this fork. Some of the terminology I use goes across all the forks, but how you actually do these adjustments varies depending on brand. One of the interesting features of this fork is that it has a positive and a negative air chamber. So most forks just have one air chamber and you set it up for 30% sag and so on and so forth, and then you're good to go. And then over here you can set up your compression with a little dial depending on the trail, so it gives you a little bit of room. Like if you want your fork softer on the fly, you can click it to a softer setting, but if you want it firmer, you can click it to a firmer setting, so on and so forth. Some forks even have lockout over here, which is pretty cool, so if you're climbing you don't want that bob, so on and so forth. I'm not going to focus so much on that with this fork. I'm going to focus more on getting these chambers set up and setting up the rebound, because those are really important. And then from there you can set up your compression how you like it. And that's something I generally do once I'm kind of on the trail and riding around, or depending on the different conditions I'm going to be riding in. So let's talk about these air chambers, because it's interesting. So why on this fork are there two chambers instead of just one? Well, the positive chamber and the negative chamber do different things. The idea here is that you want a fork that behaves differently in different situations. So when I'm just riding along the trail and there's like these little, stuttery bumps or something like that, I want the fork to be pretty plush, pretty soft, and to be able to absorb those bumps. But if I, am going to go and compress off of a jump or something like that, I don't want the fork to be super soft. That initial bit of compression might be soft, but I want it to firm up, ramp up pretty quickly. So what the negative chamber does is you have just slightly more pressure in it than the positive chamber, and what that does is it gives you this kind of top range of your suspension to be soft, and then after that it firms up. And then when you play with the dial over here, like for example when I'm jumping, I will crank the dial to a firmer setting because I don't want the fork to compress when I'm pumping to go off a lip or something like that. It's always going to compress, I just don't want it to compress a lot or super easily. So that is why you can kind of adjust that over on the fly once you get your air chambers set up correctly. Rebound is really important because, again, for jumping and things like that, or if you're on a bunch of like chattery bumps or even some bigger things, you want the fork to rebound fast enough to get ready for the next hit, but you don't want it to rebound so fast that it kicks back at you. And you don't, because if your rebound's too quick, then you're going to have this bouncy front end, and your front end's going to be bouncing up and down. If you have it too slow, you might compress, and then you'll hit another bump, and then you're going to feel the impact of the bump. So rebound can be tricky. You want it so the suspension will rebound back out fast enough to hit the next bump, but not too fast to make the front end funky. So it's tricky. Rebound is a tricky thing. Thankfully, it's a little clickety knob here, so you can adjust it while you're on the trail. So doing these air chambers is something that's more difficult to adjust while you're on the trail. If you carry a shock pump with you, yes, you can. Sometimes I do that, especially with full suspension, because I will adjust my rear shock a lot for, firm it up for jumping and soften it for trail riding and stuff like that. So let's get into it. and talk a little bit about how you do these. First things first, I want to look at the numbers, and I'll show this on the screen for you so you can see them. And they go by rider weight, and they give you kind of a range. And well, actually, they don't give you a range. They give you kilograms and pounds. That's what it is. So they have like 180 pounds is 72 psi in the positive, 79 in the negative. And the negative is always a little bit more than the positive because that's what's going to give you that. DVO calls it off the top. I like that name. It gives you that little off the top cushion. And 190 is 76 and 84, and 200 pounds is 80, 88. So my weight changes throughout the year. Like right now in the wintertime, I tend to be pushing closer to 200 pounds, somewhere between 190 and 200. And then in the summer, I can get down to like 185, something like that. But I also am a really aggressive rider, and I like to jump a lot and hit things hard. So I personally go set it for a little heavier settings. You'll know that with people, especially riders that have like a BMX background or people that do a lot more technical riding and jumps and stuff, they'll set their suspension a little stiffer than somebody who's just looking for a nice plush cushy ride down the trail, right? So I set mine for a little stiffer, and so I'm gonna start setting it for a 200-pound rider, even though I'm not 200 pounds. And so that's 80 psi positive, 88 negative, and then they even show you what the rebound should be. So 10 clicks. So you close the rebound, and then you go 10 clicks from that closed position, which I'll show you at the end here. And then those three settings are what I will start with. And then I can always micro adjust things with the compression lever over here, and I can adjust the rebound as needed if I feel like it's not quite dialed in while I'm on the trail. Cool. So the first thing you'll need is a specialized shock pump. Not Specialized the brand. That's why I don't like the name of their brand. But a pump specifically designed for doing shocks. You cannot use a regular floor pump to do shock adjustments. Don't even try it. You potentially might ruin your fork, but you probably can't even get up to a high enough pressure anyway to ruin your fork. But you'll just let the air out of your fork, and then your fork will be useless until you use one of these things. So we'll go ahead and get at it. So what they say is you want to take the bottom cover off, put the pump on, and then you want to let all the air out. So now I have no air in the negative chamber. You do not want to lose these caps. Very important. So I'm going to put them over on my little bike stand tray. Now there's a top cap here, and this gets me to the positive chamber. So it's very important you let all the air out of the negative chamber to start. Okay, so this is like, wow, 50. This is actually set right where I need it. It's at 80. I think I could go one more. Cool. All right. Now I want to go down here. And I want to pump this up to 88. Pretty much close to 90 here. And don't want you going more than 10 psi over on the bottom. So really it was that simple. It's done. I put the caps back on. So I put 80 on the top, 88 roughly, 90. The gauge isn't, you know, that incremental, but it's any somewhere between 88 and 90. So that'll give me that extra roughly 8 to 10 psi of off the top cushion, whatever you want to call it. And I'll show you on my DVO fork. They do this differently, but they do the same thing. It's just different, and I actually think it's a little easier, believe it or not. So that's set. Now I need to go look underneath, or maybe it's right here on the back, and figure out the rebound before I show you that. Okay, so here is the rebound adjustment. I turned it all the way off, so there's no rebound, and then I go 10 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now the rebound is set. You can actually feel the clicks better than you can hear them, but they're really easy to feel where they engage. So there you have it. So basically this fork is ready. Okay, so up here is what's called low speed compression. This is what I was talking about. If I'm going off of a jump or something, that's a low speed compression, like if I'm pushing down to preload off of a jump, versus if I hit a big bump and the front wheel has a sudden jerk, that's high speed compression. You want that to react how you expect it to when you hit a bump, but for low speed compression you set it, you know, for whatever you're going to ride. Like so it's, I don't know where I want this set yet because I haven't ridden this bike, but what's cool is when I'm out on the trail I can just move this to where I want it to be while I'm riding, and once I have it set I'm good to go. If I'm jumping, I'm going to set the low speed compression to pretty high. I want it pretty firm. When I'm not jumping and I'm riding more chattery, bumpy stuff, I'll want this at a lower setting to soften it a little bit. If I'm climbing, I want this firm. If I'm not climbing, I can have it down. Sometimes I usually just find that comfortable medium and I just leave it alone and don't play with it. And finally, I'll know if these adjustments are working the way I want them to based on what this does. So when I sit on the bike, this should go at about 30%, right? But if I'm riding and jumping, I want it to go much higher, right? If I'm doing a lot of jumping and this is only going to down here, my fork is too stiff. If I'm doing a lot of jumping and I find it all the way up against here, then my fork might be too soft, and that would mean I might need to add volume spacers and things like that. I do not know if there's volume spacers already in this fork. I'm gonna have to take the air cap off and find out, but I think I'm gonna ride it first and then I'll know pretty quickly whether it's set up the way that I want it to be. But definitely watch this. If you get off your bike and this thing is down here, you have everything way too firm. If you're not jumping and you're just generally riding, you should see this somewhere up here. If you're riding really rough terrain, things like that, after your ride you should see this much closer to the top, and you're using the full travel of your fork that way. Having this down here on a pretty rugged ride means you're beating yourself up unnecessarily. So that's what this is for. It's a good gauge. Then you can know whether you need to adjust some of the settings, lower your air pressure, things like that. Okay, so there you have it. This bike is ready for me to take it out on the trail. And then once I get to riding it, I can adjust things, play around with things, and get them absolutely dialed to where I need them. I really appreciate your support for my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.